Good evening, everyone. It's good to have you here with us tonight. We were just talking about what are we going to tell you about him, because he's coughing a lot because he has like this infection thing, but it's not the infection that everyone else is talking about. It's kind of like his own personal infection.
I promise.
It's India, can you please send him medicine? You need some of my mommy's, like chicken noodle soup down there from Garland, Texas.
Yes. My mom is here.
That's what I'm talking about. That's why I'm talking to her.
She can verify. I've done this.
I can verify.
Life.
I've sat in the office next to him for 6 years.
And every year at this time, when the weather changes,
that's true.
I get this stuff.
It's true.
It's not.
So he might cough, but if he does, he might even have to leave if he gets really bad. So,
but we're fine.
We're all fine. Everybody's fine. So, good evening. Tonight we're talking about another omni, in which we're talking about the attributes of God. And tonight it's about God's presence is omni. He's like kind of like everywhere. And so that's what we're talking about tonight. So there's lots of passages that point to that. I have one that I already like. It's one that everyone probably already knows, but there's lots of good ones in there.
The one you were singing?
Yes, that one. That's why I was singing it, because it's the old.
Missed it.
It's an old school chorus. Where can I go? But I won't go any further than that. Yeah. So it's an old school chorus. Yeah. Psalm 139. Oh, look, India Adler's vouching for her son. It's a yearly thing. There you go.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. So he appreciates that, India. All right. So anyway, we're talking about that God's presence is everywhere. There's a few things about that that's kind of interesting when you think about it. And then there's also some real great applications. And I think that's why Psalm 139 is so endearing to us. I think when we read it, there's a lot of things endearing about it, So anyway, who wants to start us off with your favorite passage about the presence of God? The omnipresence of God.
I don't know if it's my favorite, but it's one that I would not have. I didn't think of this initially. The one that you're going to share, I think, is one of the first ones that usually comes to mind.
It's the easy one. I have to admit it.
There's a couple probably that I think quickly come to mind when we talk about God's presence. But in my reading, I came across one verse that I thought was spectacular on the subject.
All right.
And
be spectacular for us. No, you go first.
It's a big deal.
You get to say it first.
Okay, you ready for this?
It's something out of Genesis 1.
It's Genesis 1:1.
And
think about it.
In the beginning,
God created.
He's got the gift of prophecy.
Don't make me laugh. That's why I start coughing. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth.
Go ahead. Keep unpacking it.
Right? Yep. Space. So, it was kind of like, I don't know, it was sort of...
aha for you?
Have I never thought about that before, that scripture in that context?
Yeah.
That in order for him to create space, he has to exist outside of it somehow. Again, this is like we're getting back to, like the same place we've been every week.
Yeah.
Really, where we're trying to figure this thing out that we can't figure out. But in order for him to create, God created the heavens and the earth. So he created space, and now that space is populated with all kinds of other things. And as he creates, it's populated with more stuff. And so he's there. He fills all of the space that he's created. But thinking about him being outside of, and I'll come back probably to this as we move on, just a way of thinking about God's being everywhere all the time and how that works.
But you just said something, though. Can I just ask you right there at that
Sure.
point? And that's one of the things I was reading also is that God being outside, and yet he is present everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of like, again, it's just another one of these kind of things. Did I read that right? You're kind of going, Did I read that right? Am I understanding this? Because it seems like I'm reading two different things at one time.
Mm-hmm.
And we are, aren't we?
Yeah, but those two things are true at the same time.
That's what I mean.
Yeah. So they're
yeah.
That's the reality, is that those are two different things. That God is outside, so he's separate from space in that sense, but he also fills it with all of himself
Right.
everywhere all
Right.
the time.
Now, again, I hope I'm not getting ahead of your notes and all, but you're sparking thoughts.
I have
the
no
stuff
notes.
I've read and all.
I just
So
have a bunch of books.
you have
and-
lots of books. Yeah.
and,
There
Well,
is a
that's-
passage that says exactly that.
Which one?
Jeremiah 23:24.
Can I hide in
have
the
that one
secret
now.
places?
Huh?
I have that written
Yeah,
down.
yeah.
But go ahead.
No. I was just saying it's to your point that, Jeremiah asks a rhetorical question with we know the answer. He says, "Can a man hide himself in secret places, so that I cannot see him? Declares the Lord. Do I not fill the heavens and the earth?"
Yeah.
Yeah, and the first part of that, am I a God? Am I not? He says, "Am I a God at hand and not a God far away?" I'm at hand, and I'm far away, and we can talk later about what those two things mean.
No, right
but-
there. Let's just pause right there because that's another one of these instances where I love Scripture. I love how the Lord writes things because that to me is just a beautiful phrase.
Mhm.
Can you read it again?
Am I a God at hand, declares the Lord, and not a God far away?
And that's verse 23.
Yeah. Can a man hide himself in secret places so that I cannot see him, declares the Lord? Do I not fill heaven and earth?
Chapter 23, verse 24.
20, yeah, it's 23. Chapter 23, verses 20,
Yeah.
23 and 24.
I think that's beautiful.
It's pretty serious business.
Mm-hmm.
Because I didn't read the verse before the verse that we both
Did you have
mentioned.
that written down?
I had down verse 24, but you're coming. Am I not a God who is there, who's near? Declares the Lord, and not. Yeah, that's pretty crazy. That's beautiful. I just looked at verse 24.
Oh,
Can a
good.
man? Yeah,
Well,
that's
my
beautiful.
work here is done.
Yeah,
Mm.
that's really wonderful. Yeah.
Sorry. There it is.
So, but the thing about him being everywhere all the time and all the you often hear people talk about him being in it, and that's and that you probably came across this in your reading as well, that that a pantheist believes that he is in everything.
Mhm.
And that's his presence. He's in, he's one with the rocks. And he's one with the trees.
He is
He
the
is
thing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
he,
he
is
is the
the
thing.
rock.
Yeah.
He is the mountain. He is.
Yeah,
The,
and that's while you might say that's a slight variation, it's not. It's a huge variation, right? And
Yeah.
that it's really an important variation. And maybe that's where I don't know much about pantheism, but maybe that's kind of where they get that a little bit as they read that about God, and he says that he is present everywhere, and that's where they come from that a little bit. I'm not sure, but that is definitely a distinction that has to be made, that he is not one with the rocks. He is present among all that and there completely everywhere all the time.
yeah. This actually. Let me see who this is. I think this is Grudem. So
Yeah.
you guys may have read this.
Grudem.
No, this is not a perfect analogy. Obviously, on that line of pantheistic thinking, he says, and he acknowledges this is an imperfect analogy, but he says the analogy of a sponge filled with water is helpful. Water is present everywhere in the sponge, but the water is still completely distinct from the sponge. And so, it obviously breaks down because at some point there is sponge and not water, when you get small enough, but you get the idea. So the sponge is full of water, but the sponge and the water are still different. And so that's what's different about what we're saying versus what the pantheist says. The pantheist says that the sponge and the water, or that God and his creation are the same. God is the rock, like we said.
Right.
God is the mountain.
this
God is everything.
microphone.
God is
This
the
table.
He is all of this combined. All of this is God. And what we're saying is that God is distinct from the creation, but he's present everywhere in the creation.
Now, what's the
And
problem?
all of him is present everywhere.
What's the problem with a pantheistic worldview like that? I'm not asking this because I thought about it. I'm asking it because I just now thought about it. Like,
Well, the first thing would be that it's not God that pantheism is even talking about.
yeah.
There,
Oh, well, Rob Quanston's already beat us to the punch. Good definition, Rob. God is in all things, therefore all things are God.
Right.
Yeah.
And so there you go.
There you
That's
go.
What's wrong with it?
Yeah, man. We ought to have Rob. Rob and Lee Christek ought to be up here one of these days because they're always out there. Ellen, turn all this over to those guys one of these days.
There you go.
Well, if I'm not over this by next week, then somebody can have my spot.
Sanitize that microphone.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, because I think Rob's point, his definition is great because it makes all things God, and that's just not true. I mean, he is unique, and all. So, some of the other verses that we could look at that inform us about his being present all times. So we already mentioned Jeremiah 23, but there's also this statement by David that's throughout. It's in Second Chronicles and First Kings, and but will God really dwell on earth? The heavens, even the highest heavens, cannot contain you. How much less this temple I have built? So there, David's speaking to, like, you are so vast. How is it that you are going to come and abide here, in this temple? And then Ephesians 1:22 and 23, and God placed all things under his feet and appointed him to be head over everything for the church, which is his body, the fullness of him who fills everything in every way. Yeah. And then Acts 17 says, for in him we live and move and have our being. And then Colossians 1 says, he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. That's the one. I mean, obviously, Colossians 1 encompasses like so many of his attributes, so many of his like go-to kind of statements about the full nature of him that we have such a hard time fathoming and all. Yeah. There's Lee Christek. He's right. It's like he says pantheism takes away that distinct personality of God. Yeah, I think that's really good. Good stuff, these two guys. You can tell they're friends.
Yeah, and in some of the stuff that I was reading, it was like, those are the two errors that you fall in. Like those are the two sort of like extreme ends of the spectrum when you swing one way or the other. That you have pantheism on one side that has God too connected to the creation where he becomes indistinct from it. And then on the other side of that, you would have the error of more the deist error of having
he started
God
at the top and then stepped away.
Yeah, like he's kind of created time and space and the earth and natural law, and then he's impersonal. So he kind of sets it on course and it goes, and he's not personally or intimately involved in its everyday running.
Right.
And so, on the one side he's too connected. There is no distinction between God and the creation. On the other side, there's a disconnect that I think we don't see in the scripture where he is not involved in the creation at all. And somewhere in the middle, we have, I think, the biblical teaching, which is the Orthodox teaching, which is what we're talking about tonight, that he's both. He is outside of the creation, so he is distinct from it in some way because he's created it, but at the same time he fills it and he is intricately involved in running
with
it and
like Lee
upholding
said,
it, just like you said in Colossians. He upholds it, so he's very involved in every detail that happens here.
When you were talking about the spectrum of like it being pantheistic and the other end, and when you're about to talk to the other end, I kind of thought about like use the Force, Luke. I mean, it's like it's this power that's everywhere, but it's very impersonal. That would be the other end of that spectrum, kind of. Where, and I do think that every one of his attributes we've talked about so far, there is this. I think this is true. I might not be totally right, but if it's not true, most of them it is. It's that they are. This attribute of him is all encompassing, whether it's his power or his knowledge or his holiness, and yet he never once in all of that all-encompassing, unfathomable attribute of his never loses his desire or his ability to be personal to us.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just really crazy. One of the things I read last week when I was studying being all-powerful, the guy made a comment and he said that at some
Last
point...
week when you were studying being all-powerful. Not
Yes.
last week when you were being all-powerful.
No,
right?
that was only for that long, and it's only in my
okay.
mind. So
Okay.
yeah, but he was talking about that if a being could grow in their power to where they would eventually go to the place that they would become unable to relate to other humans or other creatures who are not as powerful as they were. And this is kind of random, but what I loved about that is that God is beyond all that, and He's still personable. He still seeks us, and He's the one who pursues us. And He is just kind of blows my mind with how He is so much both and. He's everything, and that's true even tonight in this about Him being ever present in every way like that, So anyway, what other great insights have we had into His being present, into His omnipresence?
Looking at me now. I think I brought it up a couple weeks ago, maybe last week. I don't remember. But I think one of the things that I point out is I think you're right. I think omnipresent is one of those ones that is more personal than the other characteristics or attributes that we've talked about, just because of the nature of it. Like He's with you always.
Well, especially if you look at Psalm 139.
Right.
It's very intimate,
Right. I think what makes us uncomfortable, even a little bit, is the fact that He is also the person orchestrating the judgment in hell for those who are not believers. Does that make sense? So I guess if I was to unpack that a little bit is we often think of Satan as the weird red guy with the pitchfork, and he's the one that's torturing everybody. That's not true. He's being tortured also.
Right.
He is in condemnation.
Mm-hmm.
He obviously falls short of the glory of God. And so he's being punished alongside the demons, his minions, and those who follow him, those who follow the way of destruction, which is a really difficult thing, I think. When I first heard that in Bible college, I was like, whoa, because we don't talk like that in church. We don't usually describe God that way, but He's present there and He's active. And I think that is pretty deep to think about when we think about in kind of conjunction with His other attributes like omnipotence, or even communicable attributes like His goodness and His faithfulness and His love and His justice.
So then that is that pertinent, or is that related to the Psalm 139 passage? If I go up to the heavens, if I go down to the depths, you're there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Down to Sheol, He's there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Is it okay to look at that passage? Am I getting ahead of us or anything?
No.
So Psalm 139, if you want to join us there in the Bible, Psalm 139, verses 7, really, the first part of it is kind of about God's omniscience. Maybe we'll be there next week when we're talking about God's all-knowing power, because the first 7 verses kind of talk about what God knows. So we'll probably be back here next week. But then the verse 7 through 8:12 are talking about where God is. And so let's read the passage real quick. Where can I go from your spirit? Or where can I flee from your presence? If I ascend to heaven, you're there. If I make my bed in Sheol, behold, you are there. If I take the wings of the dawn, if I dwell to the remotest part of the sea, even there your hand will lead me, your right hand will lay a hold of me. if I say, surely the darkness will overcome me, and the light around me will be night, even the darkness is not dark to you, and the night is as bright as the day, and the darkness and light are alike to you.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's another whole passage about just the beauty of Scripture, and it's written so lovely. And the end part of that passage, verse 17, verse 11 and 12 rather, he's saying that, he says, surely the darkness will overwhelm me. And in ancient, among the ancients, they perceived light as being divine, godly. They perceived darkness as being like death and chaos and separate, apart from God. And so, here the psalmist is like going, so if I can go into the utter darkness, if it would overwhelm me, then you wouldn't be there. But he goes, but you know what? That's not true, because the darkness is not even dark to you. And the night is as bright as the day, because they're the same to you.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like going, even in all that I understand about what is light and dark, what is good and bad, you're in the middle of that too. You're there in that. You're present in all that. And so he's unpacking it, and he's talking about the womb in one part, this passage, but in this part he's like going, there is no place high enough I could go, there's no place deep enough I could go, there's no place I could go that is even into the darkest recesses of all creation, and you are there. So it's really a very crazy thought, So, and that passage right there is a passage that can give us a lot of practical application for the passage, when we want to talk about that. But that passage really does it for us and all. So, anyway, any comments or other thoughts you have about that passage? Another one related to it, maybe? I didn't read Tozer on purpose this weekend because I knew that you were reading him faithfully, and so I thought I'll give you all the Tozer quotes.
I thought we were supposed to be reading him.
Yeah, I
every
thought
week.
so too.
Well, I'm just. It's good that you're reading him.
I don't remember him really getting into that. Tozer was good on this. He talked about, going back to what you said before. He talked a lot about what a source of comfort it is to know that God is always there. So that you said something a while ago that he's, now I can't remember what you said, but I almost interrupted to make this point, and I thought, no, I'll wait. And I should have, because now it's gone. But he's basically, when you get to the end of Tozer's chapter on this is where he
always is with a bang.
Yeah, that's the conclusion that he comes
at the end of all of his chapters are great stuff.
The conclusion that he comes to, the knowledge that we are never alone, calms the troubled sea of our lives and speaks peace to our souls, is what he said. And so that's the practical application of this teaching, that God is, that he's always there, that he's always fully there,
right,
too. Anywhere that we go, to the highest place or to the lowest place, that God is there. And that, and Tozer's conclusion, which I think is a good one, is that should give us peace, that we know that he's always there. We can always go to him. He's never far away from us. Or I guess he can be far away from us, actually, in some cases. But when we're seeking him, he's never far away.
Yeah.
And so...
But that same principle is also very disconcerting.
Mm.
Yeah, that can be.
It could be judgment.
That man right there grunted like he knew what I was talking about.
He knows.
Mm. Yeah, he knows.
We all know.
Oh, you do too?
You do too?
I know. I mean, it's true. But why is it though that we don't? Why is it that we don't live like it though? I've thought about that a little bit, kind of, and doing some of the reading and all. Like, why is it that I don't have this sense of immediacy about him being with me? Why is that?
Tozer talks about it kind of a little bit. One of the things he says, the resultant experience is not visionary but real.
Well, okay, translate that.
Meaning that we want to experience, like we're a very experiential people, like just people, not just Americans, all people. We desire experience. And so when we want the physical nature, we want the touch, we want the smells, we want this, that's not necessarily how God works. I mean, we have experiences with other Christians, mountaintop experiences with high highs and those moments, and that's what fuels us is the experience. But I talk about it with the youth all the time, is those things are fleeting. Like those things so often just pass away so quickly. So I think, and this is my very limited experience, I'm not going to like overgeneralize, but at least in youth ministry, what I've noticed is, and what I've seen is, we make gods out of experiences, and that is what that's what creates a character of God for us. And that's kind of what I've kind of talked about it a lot before during this podcast, is like we talk, I've said before, we experience God as some kind of cosmic vending machine to give us and shower us with gifts and, to give me what I want when I want it. But that's not how God works. And so in a similar fashion, we don't experience his presence or practice the holiness of his presence because we want a specific experience. It's why Bible reading is so hard sometimes, especially for, again, youth students. That's kind of the realm I work. They're like, I don't get anything out of it. What they're saying is I don't know how to experience such and such a thing. I'm not learning something new. Well, what if you weren't meant to learn anything new? You're just meant to know more about God. Even if it's something just you're reading the Word of God to read the actual character of God. Not to get some deep theological truth, but just to know of his presence, to be aware of his presence. It's, I think that's kind of what detracts humans away, because we're very, experiential. I don't know. Like, does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like we want the thing, and we don't really want the thing, like we desire stuff.
It's interesting that when you say that, I was sitting here thinking about how many, and I'll be very careful how I say this, but there are many large churches that become large because they're so experience oriented, in my personal opinion. I could be really wrong about that, but what is interesting is that when I think about men, primarily men, in Scripture, who have had an experience with God, it's kind of like not the experience they want to relive. I mean, I get the sense that Isaiah was pretty blown away by it, and probably, I don't know if you want to do that again, like on a weekly basis every Sunday morning, or something. I get the sense that actually experiencing God was pretty traumatic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's kind of what we talked about with Joel when he was here. Like when, sometimes when we talk about, we sing songs and stuff about wanting to see him or being able to see him with our own eyes. Do you really want that? Like most often, even just the angels, when they appeared to people.
Well, he covers with two wings. They cover their eyes.
Yeah. So they're like we usually think of these beautiful beings. No, they're like eyeball creatures, like eyes everywhere, weird wings, like crazy feet. You're talking like weird things. That's why they said, "Do not be afraid," because people were scared. They saw that thing flying in the air. They're like, "What the heck is that?" That's kind of just the reality of what that is. And the same thing with God. God proper. When he descended to Sinai and he was talking to Moses. What did Moses had to like hide himself in a little hidey hole?
Yeah.
Like what we're talking about here, the gift of God's omnipresence, the reality and the promise and the doctrine that is, gives us comfort, as Tozer says. And is a grace that he's not actually physically here. Because if he was,
isn't that crazy?
we would die. Like, we would die.
We would be like the German in Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Yeah, we would
would
actually
melt.
die. We would melt.
Yeah.
We would melt before him. Like when
There's so much
Psalm
theology in that
46. Yeah, when Psalm 46, he says, the mountains melt like wax before the Lord. That's literary,
But it's
but it's also real. like when he's talking about, like you talk about the background behind that, the angel of the Lord, who a lot of times people think it's a theophany of Jesus Christ, pre-incarnate Jesus Christ comes down in the form of man and slaughters the Assyrian army, like thousands, just him, like before his presence. And the king comes out and he's like, oh my gosh, like what? And then he writes this psalm about the very presence of God, that the actual presence of God comes down and slaughters people, breaks the bow, shatters the spear, burns chariots with fire. And he was like, the mountains be moved and shake and tremble before the Lord. Like that is not just a literary device. That is, I think, actual reality of the power and just the presence of God.
Wow,
just
that's
his
great.
very presence.
Really
And
good
so
comment.
I think the omnipresence of God, even by nature of his invisibleness, he's everywhere. He's withholding all things. I think that speaks to a few things. His and I'll just keep it to just two things: his omnipotence, which we talked about last week, and his faithfulness.
So what do you mean by that? Wait, connect the dots, because I thought you were going to go somewhere else with that.
Okay.
You just made a real sharp right-hand turn.
Yeah.
And I kept going straight.
Straight.
So let me back up and try and follow you around that corner.
Yeah. So his omnipresence, when you think about, like Steve was talking about earlier, like him being in all things, holding all things together by the power of his being. That is a testament to his omnipotence, his power.
His power, right.
Right? And not just withholding all things, withholding all things, capital A, capital L, capital L, like all things that we see around you. You guys at home, when you guys are looking around, the chair you're sitting in, the nice, comforter you have on you, like all warmed up, all things, he holds all things together. All things do not obliterate because he is within all things holding them together. That's a powerful statement. It's by his very presence right now that we don't get dusted like Thanos does in the Avengers, Like that's an actual reality. So that, but also when we talk about what Steve was talking about earlier, is the comfort of knowing that he's present at all places, at all times. The God who killed thousands of Assyrians by the word of his power, that can take that much. Like the Israelites were gonna die. They were gonna die. There was no other way outside of that besides Jesus. God had to show up. He had to show up, because if he didn't,
But God.
yeah, but God, like that's a reality. Mm-hmm. I think that is a testament also to his faithfulness. Like to his faithfulness of his promises, to the faithfulness of his love, to the faithfulness of his perfect justice, his faithfulness in being in all things, but also with us through all things. Like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Mm-hmm. Actually walk through them through physical fire. But that's another part of the angel of the Lord showed up, and it's like should be only 3. No, there's 4 people in there. What? I think it's a testament to his faithfulness in all things that he holds together. He also walks through all issues in life with his people that come to know him. Mm-hmm. If that makes sense. If I connected the dots for you.
I think so. So, how do we begin to live in a greater reality, awareness of his presence? And what would the result of that look like? Because I think in my mind it would have equal parts horror and equal parts comfort. Actually, I take that back. It'd probably have a whole lot more on the the disconcerting side, actually, that to know that he was there when I said that, thought that, did that, and then maybe there's a comfort that he was there. I don't know, just processing. I'm not sure. But so how do we come to grips with that in such a way that it's an awareness, and not only is it awareness, but it's a life-changing awareness.
Like a call to
Well,
action.
we're
There we go.
we're talking about God being obviously a very complex being to exist in such a way, but we're complex too, and so I think like Paul tells us that we can be sorrowful yet always rejoicing. We can,
Okay.
we can experience kind of like opposite emotions simultaneously in some way. We can be sad about a situation. Think about when a person we know who's a believer passes away. We're sad at not being able to be in that person's presence anymore, but at the same time, we can also be joyful.
Yeah.
And we
There's-
can also
yeah.
rejoice that we know that person is in the presence of God now, that their struggle, their pain, their fight with sin, that's all gone for them. And so we can rejoice, but we can also be sad. And I think that in a similar way, this greater awareness of God's presence, I think can affect both of those emotions that you were talking about, where we can be like, oh boy, God is here. He knows that I thought that I did that. And so we can have that almost said fear. It's not really fear. We can have that, disappointment maybe that we would be in his presence and kind of, I don't want to say let him down, but that we still sin. We should be broken. Or we would experience some brokenness over our sin, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But at the same time, we can be joyful and we can be glad to know that sin is not the sin that put us over the line. That sin is not the one that was just one too many.
Yeah.
So we can be broken over our sin while at the same time having a deep understanding of grace and forgiveness and so learning to, obviously want to grow in our sanctification so that we can experience fewer times of that brokenness. But at the same time, we understand that the growth is a process, and God knew that, when we believed in him, we were not just going to be perfect every day after that. And
Well, if one of the things, I guess, then a question I'd have is that if we are coming into a greater awareness of his presence with us in our sin, in those moments when we sin, that should we not also become far more attuned with his mercy? That like, I know what I just did, and I know you were here and saw it, and I'm still standing.
yeah,
Making like 1 John 1:9
I would
really real,
yeah, I would think both of those emotions probably grow or intensify maybe a little bit, where the more that we become aware of our sin, we maybe experience a greater brokenness over it. So, we're kind of going that way while at the same time having a deeper understanding and growing in our experience of his grace at the same time.
Yeah. I think the more I'm contemplating this one, the more it's kind of like not rattling my cage, but it's kind of like it seems to have a little bit more real personal application.
Yep.
Thinking about him being with me.
Yeah, I think earlier, maybe where you thought I was going, and I was going there a little bit, was
Worship.
there should be an actual fear.
Yeah.
There should be a fear of
Kind of like the Proverbs or the Proverbs awe.
Yeah.
The awe of Proverbs, I mean.
Yeah. I mean actual fear too. Like those things that I talked about in Psalm 46 and the reality of who God is, I think doesn't take shape for us in the same way that it did for the ancient Near East Israelites, because they saw, when you see a pillar of fire in the middle of your encampment, you tend to believe that that's God and terrified out of your mind.
But that's just,
you know what I mean?
That's really good you said that, though, because a pillar of fire and a pillar of fire by day and a cloud, pillar of fire by night and a cloud by day, and they still complain about the manna.
Yeah.
I mean, like, he's in the camp. It's like he's sitting in the room, and they're like going, "We really don't like what you're serving. Can you got anything else on the menu?"
Yeah.
And so, that's an interesting observation. I mean, like, even when he's in the room, I mean, like, he's right over there because it's a big sphere of fire, and we're like going, "Yeah, well, you know what? I'm glad he's here because I got a thing to say to him."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, even just Jesus' ministry. Like the reality of, like, they killed him, And so when we talk about, and it wasn't until after he died and the earthquake and the curtain tore in two, they're like, what was that? Surely this man was the Son of God.
Only some of them. The rest of them
only
says,
some of them.
Let's lie about this and cover it up.
Yeah. So I think the reality of God's presence for us in the way he interacts as omnipresence, again, is a grace to us, because I think his actual presence would be terrifying, like the full power, the full nature of God before us. I'm in some level, we're not going to experience that, but we will. Like when we get to heaven, we see him really, and we're going to fall down before him. Like every knee and tongue, every knee will bow and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. But the reality of his presence now for us, I think, should be a little fearful. Not like we should be terrified all the time, but I think the nature of who God is, in light of our sin, should shake us a bit. It should at least give us cause to pause before reacting or interacting in a way that would be displeasing to God.
Well, but what just happened? I mean, I just thinking. You're bringing up the people in the tent and the fire and the cloud and all.
We don't,
and their total disregard of him.
They're like, look at that
I
thing.
mean, I'm like going, why am I asking about why don't we pay attention to him and learn to be more sensitive to him? He was there, and they learned to disregard him.
Yeah.
And so, in a sense, right now, I've come to this place of I've gone from like, wow, God's really cool, to like, wow, man is so thick. I mean, like, what is it about man that, like, yeah, that's God over there. He's in that cloud, and at night he turns into a fire. But it doesn't matter. He's just over there. We do what we want anyway.
Yeah.
It's like it's amazing that we can grow so blah.
Yeah.
About him, and that's where we are or that's where I am. I'll speak for myself when I say that. Why is it that I'm not really taken by his presence, and I take that truth more seriously in my life?
Yeah.
Last week, there was something that I don't have it here. It was in all my stuff last week, and I didn't have a chance to bring it up, but it was something that I had alluded to it 2 weeks ago. And last week we were talking about God's being all powerful, and one of the things I read was talking about how, oh man, now I'm gonna mess it up because I don't have it right in front of me. But it was talking about how we talk about natural laws and just the natural order of the world, and last week, and one of the people that I was reading about was talking about how that's just a way that God works his power in the world. And we have kind of explained it away as just natural. Oh, it's just a natural, And so we sort of don't pay attention. And basically the point was that 2,000 years ago or 4,000 years ago, people they saw God in everything.
Mm-hmm.
They attributed things to God that we attribute now to that's just nature. That's just, it's just natural causes or whatever. And 2 weeks ago, I brought it up, and it was just kind of like posed the question of like, what if we miss God because he does things in our midst, and we just kind of like go, well, that's just,
we just write it off.
That's just a hurricane, or that's just, whatever. And so we just, so not really asserting anything, but I thought it was interesting that it came up in my reading last week that we are not spiritual people today. Like these people were spiritual people.
Mm-hmm.
Like that guy who reached out and touched the ark, somebody might have been like, oh, he had a heart attack and died.
We would know.
A heart attack is a natural cause,
He had
right?
a stroke when he reached out, yeah.
But we do that. We do that. We
explain away things.
Yeah, and I just thought that was interesting. And so I don't know. That could be maybe there's something there in your question of like, why aren't we more aware of God's presence? Why don't we see Him? Well, we've explained it. We talk about He is here and He's intimately involved in the creation, and He is upholding it, and we say that He, everything that happens because He's willed it in some sense or another, and then He's the one. He's the actor here. He's the one acting to bring about the things that happen, and so He is here. But we just explain a lot of His movements away as like, well, that's just cause and effect, or it's just natural causes, or it's just
you've seen it. I mean, our point of reference is movies and all. How ancient peoples often go like, they would attribute the thunder to God, or the lightning to God, or they connected Him to what was around them. Mm-hmm. Whether they did it totally accurately or not, it was very much what you're saying. It's like they did not disconnect creation from the Creator. Mm-hmm. Whether their connections were all exactly right, they still were very accurate in the sense that they were connecting them.
Yeah.
So,
Helen, she says, "Well, you didn't grow up charismatic because we saw God everywhere." Maybe y'all are onto something.
Yeah. Well,
I think a part of it too is like, at least for people, and not by and large. Again, I'm not going to make an overgeneralization or anything, but generally, I think people tend to kind of forget God during really easy and praiseworthy times, and run to Him when things are really difficult. Or blame Him because things are really difficult, And I think that kind of just speaks to our desire for His presence in a way that we want it, and not how it's actually expressed in reality, But I do think, just as a principle, when we read the Old Testament, I mean, it's a mirror of us.
The Old Testament?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's totally a mirror of us today.
Because we all think, if I were to see God, I would. I mean, if Jesus were to walk in this room right now, I would fall at my feet. I'd fall at His feet.
Yeah.
No,
so you wouldn't. You'd yell, "Crucify Him."
Yeah. Like what? So I think that's pretty true.
Man, that is such an interesting thought.
And I think
that's preachable.
Yeah, I think the reality of His presence. I know quickly because we're ending, but I think generally if you want to experience more of God's presence, read the scriptures. That's a really practical application. Like, I tell students all the time, they're like, I don't really experience God. I'm not really feeling Him.
But this
right
book
now
is sitting on the table collecting dust.
Yes.
You're like, why doesn't God speak to me?
Right there.
because you have to open it.
I think it was
and
John
read it.
Piper that said, I heard God's voice when I started reading the Bible out loud.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a reality. I think take seriously the things the tools that God's given us to experience a personal presence with him. May not be physical presence, but a personal presence with him, which is daily reading, prayer, the graces of fellowship. There's so many things I could talk about right now with the importance of going to church. Like, I know it's really scary and things are really terrifying right now because of viruses and all kinds of stuff, but the reality of the fellowship of believers, it brings the reality of God's presence manifest to you, before you. It brings the reality of his omnipresence within fellowship together. We can go, where 2 or 3 are gathered, right? That's kind of what that's talking about. I know people like to throw that verse out of context, but that is a reality. And so I think those 3 things we take advantage of so often, but I think they're the most practical things if you want to experience God's presence. Like, those are the things that you have to take seriously, because those are the tools that he's given you.
I was just going to say that. That's what he's given us.
Yeah. Well, I think it's, I never do get the address exactly right, but I think it's John 1:18, and in there, and it says that Jesus reveals the Father.
Mm-hmm.
I've always loved that passage. I'm like going, wow, that is so crazy. Like, if you want to see God, you look at Jesus. So pretty interesting stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you've seen me, you've seen the Father.
Yeah. He said that too. Can you imagine all the things he said that we don't have written? Yeah. So no man has seen God at any time. The only begotten of God, who is in the bosom of the Father. He has explained him. He's explained him.
Mm-hmm.
That's crazy. I love that verse. So, all right. Well, lot to think about with this one.
This one actually helped me think about the first one we talked about, his being eternal. Because Louis Berkhoff was my favorite that I was reading on this, because he actually didn't have omnipotence as its own attribute. He had omnipotence and immensity as 2 subcategories.
I read that somewhere too.
Of his
Eternal.
now I closed it up and I don't. Yeah. Which one was it? Where is it? Hang on. Hold, please. I have it right here. Infinity. That was the attribute that he had listed, was the infinity of God, and the infinity of God is the perfection of God by which he's free from all limitations. And so then under his infinity, he had these basically subcategories where omnipotence was omnipresence was one of them, and immensity was the other. And he basically said, in a certain sense, the terms immensity and omnipresence as applied to God denote the same thing and can therefore be regarded as synonyms. Yet, there's a point of difference that should be carefully noted. Immensity points to the fact that God transcends all space and is not subject to its limits, or not subject to its limitations, while omnipresence denotes that he nevertheless fills every part of space with his entire being. The former, immensity, emphasizes the transcendence, and the latter, the immanence of God.
The guy I was reading quoted him.
Yeah, and I loved that because it also, I thought back to our discussion on his being eternal and how he relates to time, and because what he basically did there, he did the same with his eternal. So immensity was how he applied God's relationship to space, and eternal was how he applied his relationship to time. So in both cases, he stands outside of.
That's so crazy.
While simultaneously filling both completely with himself. And so it actually helped me to think about how he relates to time and how he can be eternal when I was thinking about this one. So
Yeah.
it's good.
Well, it's good stuff. Really good. Thanks, guys. And Steve, you got a little advice there from your mom.
Some medical advice.
Medical advice from Mom down in Garland. So, all right, that's great. Thanks for tuning in, guys. Good night, India, down there in Garland, Texas. We will see you guys
Gonna
next
go
week.
home and go to sleep.
Yeah. Thanks a lot for being here tonight. Bye-bye.